Join Snoqualmie Valley Museum for Snoqualmie Valley History 101, Our Beginnings. The information expressed in this video has not yet been reviewed or approved by the Snoqualmie Tribe and therefore may contain errors. As always, it is best practice to receive information directly from primary sources and directly from members of a culture themselves. Please be sure to visit snoqualmietribe.us to learn more about the Snoqualmie Tribe and their important history directly from them. The Snoqualmie Valley's history is inextricably linked to the Snoqualmie Tribe's history, and one cannot be told without the other, so it is included in this video. Extending from Snoqualmie Pass in the southeast to Snohomish and Monroe in the northwest. The Snoqualmie Valley incorporates three forks of Snoqualmie River, the Raging River Basin, and the two forks of Tolt River Basin. Snoqualmie Valley was formed by volcanic and glacial activity. The Snoqualmie Valley has been affected by two types of glacial activity, continental and alpine glaciers. The continental Vashon Stade came from Canada. The Puget Lobe of the Cordilleran ice sheet covered the valley in a 2,400 to 3,300 feet deep sheet of ice. It reached its maximum 14,000 years ago. The Vashon Stade, part of the Fraser Glaciation, was the latest major incursion of ice into the Puget Lowland. Ice advanced as far south as Tenino, Washington, and was upward of 4,200 feet thick in the northern Puget Lowland. Contours show approximate ice thickness in feet at the glacial maximum during the Vashon Stade. Vashon Glacier advanced and retreated multiple times. Each advance created a gravel dam, blocking the middle fork of the Snoqualmie and forming a vast lake. Each time the lake breached the gravel barrier, water, carrying masses of rock and aggregate, rushed in to fill the valley. Multiple bursting of these gravel dams filled our valley with gravel and boulders. During this period, the Raging River flowed out through Issaquah with a large delta spilling into Lake Sammamish near where Home Depot is today. While the alpine glaciers came down the mountains to the foothills. They were over 2,100 feet deep in the middle fork. They had their maximum 20,000 years ago and retreated by 14,000 years ago. These glaciers began reforming 3,000 years ago, only to retreat once again in 1900s. The glacier paused to create Snoqualmie Falls, where the gravel dam pushed the river over onto bedrock. When the glacier finally receded, the river was unable to cut through the rock, and the falls were formed. The valley, filled with gravel, is a giant untapped aquifer, a water supply for the future of the Puget Sound area. Snoqualmie Falls is the place of creation for the Snoqualmie people and remains a sacred site to this day. The Snoqualmie tribal creation began on the meadows of the Upper Valley, inspired by the Snoqualmie people's creation story. This oral history and others like it have been passed down for generations, explaining the transformation of the landscape and life through the eons. Though many people have focused on the moral teachings these stories have, work is being done by archaeologists and linguistics showing oral histories like these directly can be tied to the landscape and events that existed during the Ice Age here locally. They have been able to directly tie elements in these histories to the landscape and life that existed over 10,000 years ago. As the ice retreated, the valley floor became a natural grassy prairie. Wildlife naturally lived at the edge between the prairie and the forest. Mountain goats were a food source, and their wool was a staple for the woven blankets of the Snoqualmie people. Over the years, the forests returned, but the valley floor remained a prairie through traditional tending by the Snoqualmie people. Most prominently, the largest Snoqualmie prairie sat above Snoqualmie Falls in the Upper Valley. Western red cedar, one of the most prolific trees in western Washington, prospered. This tree provided for the Snoqualmie people their longhouses, baskets, skirts, hats, ropes, canoes, and watertight boxes. The Snoqualmie Tribe and other Coast Salish peoples have lived here since time immemorial. The Coast Salish people lived in both eastern and western Washington during the Ice Age. Scientists do not yet know precisely when people arrived, as most archaeological sites in our region that may have existed before 13,000 years ago were destroyed by the last glacial maximum or are under 300 feet of flood debris. The Coast Salish culture and economy were complex. This affected their settlement patterns. Coast Salish peoples regularly traveled throughout the year between different housing sites. They generally traveled on annual routes around their homelands, using river highways and overland trails to visit faraway tribes, form partnerships, arrange marriages, and access resources they lacked in their region. The trade networks extended from the Canadian Rockies to the Klamath Basin in southern Oregon and northern California. The factor that made much of the trade network operate, besides language, was kinship relations. Tribes in the region practiced exogamous marriage, where it was encouraged to marry outside of the community. Most people spent the winter in villages with several sizable houses, each with its extended family group, as well as at least one very large structure in which the highest-ranking group lived and where the village could hold a large potlatch. During winter, people of higher status rarely worked at day-to-day activities, instead using the time to create 2- and 3-dimensional art and conduct potlatches, dances, and sacred ceremonies that brought people together to socialize, trade, and negotiate relationships within and between communities. Northwest coast winter houses were typically rectilinear in floor plan, with plank walls and a plank roof, and large. Typically, they housed multi-generational family groups. They were typically constructed around a deep central pit, with vertical plank walls and a gabled roof intermeshed for stability. Huge cedar posts, complete with side beams and ridgepoles, formed a permanent framework to which wall planks and roof planks could be attached. These planks could then be taken down, loaded onto canoes, and transported from one site to another. Because of the size of western Washington trees, Coast Salish peoples developed a lumber harvesting technique that did not require cutting down and killing whole trees to obtain timber. Instead, individual boards were cut out of a living tree, and the tree was allowed to heal before being further used. Additionally, bark was stripped using a technique that did not harm the tree and was used to make items such as clothing and baskets. Pit houses were also used, in addition to mat houses and plank houses. Though there are no known pictures of such houses in the Snoqualmie Valley, there are mentions of them in early accounts. Usually summer home sites and settlements were located on beaches or terraces because the land fell so steeply to the shore or riverbank. Between the limited number of building sites and the uneven distribution of natural resources, it was most efficient for a house group to have several bases of operation. In summer, they dispersed into small groups that moved among fishing and berry-picking sites and other established but minor residential areas as their resources became available. Though many people focused on aquatic resources, many others would travel to the mountainous regions to gather other resources, and still others would travel much wider to visit other regions. Snoqualmie Pass, the state's lowest cross-cascade pass at 3,022 feet, has long served as a conduit for people and goods between the east and west sides of the mountains. Native peoples, including the Snoqualmie, Yakima, Klickitat, and many others, walked and, after the 1730s, rode horses over several mountain passes to trade and socialize. The Puget Sound region is made up of 5 ecological zones: lowland forest, wetland and prairie, mountain and fen, saltwater shoreline and sagebrush steppe. Each ecological zone provides different natural resources. The Snoqualmie Valley incorporates 3 of these zones: lowland forest, wetland and prairie, mountain and fen zones. Snoqualmie people were able to rely more on game and farmland than other Coast Salish peoples due to the unique resources available here. Because of the pass, the Snoqualmie had access to trading and mineral resources. Through the trade networks, they also accessed resources of the saltwater shoreline zone through Snohomish allies and the sagebrush steppe zone through trading with the Klickitat and Yakima. These resources provided a rich abundance for the local communities. Utilizing access to the trade route over the pass, Snoqualmie Valley residents became the major power in the region. Prior to contact by European explorers, Native American peoples had extensive trade networks allowing for the movement of people, goods, services, and ideas over hundreds of miles at a time. They utilized extensive rivers throughout the Americas and the Pacific and Atlantic coasts to form robust, pre-contact trade networks. Canoes were the standard mode of transport, but human and animal power were also utilized. Trade routes included bridges, causeways, stairways, and crossed plains, deserts, and mountains. Routes were used for trade, to move armies, and to connect communities. Water transport was highly important in the region for subsistence purposes and as a way to effect trade between tribes and later with fur traders. In the 1800s, there were over 18 Snoqualmie Tribe villages throughout the valley. Cross-continental culture interactions began affecting the lives and culture of the Snoqualmie Tribe and other Coast Salish peoples long before there were in-person contacts. In the 1730s, horses arrived from east of the mountains through trade networks with Plains peoples who had obtained horses through Spanish interactions. In 1775, Bruno Heceta, commanding Spanish ships, arrived ashore in Washington at Point Grenville in Grays Harbor County. When in 1792, George Vancouver sailed into Puget Sound, he saw evidence of smallpox. Smallpox had likely spread through trade networks from the Spanish settlement in California during the 1775-76 pandemic that broke out along the American colonies during the Revolutionary War and in the Spanish colonies throughout the continent. In 1811, the Pacific Fur Company began operations in Astoria, soon followed by other fur trading companies that began mass killing of native animals for use in the East Coast and European markets. In 1818, a treaty between the British and Americans established Oregon Territory under joint British and American occupation. Followed by American treaties in 1819 with Spain and 1824 with Russia that ceded the territory to the United States. Throughout the period, these governments did not interact with the Snoqualmie Tribe nor many of the other peoples living in the area. In 1825, the British Hudson Bay Company established its first fort in western Washington. As additional posts were established in the 1830s, cattle raised on the shrub steppe east of the mountains were driven over multiple passes, including Snoqualmie Pass, with the help of local peoples to Fort Nisqually on Puget Sound, for processing and shipment to British outposts along the Pacific Ocean. In 1840, the first American settlers Joe Meek and Robert Newell arrive in Washington. In 1846, the Oregon Treaty permanently established the 49 parallel as the boundary between the United States and British North America to the Pacific Ocean. When established, the territory encompassed an area that included the current states of Oregon, Washington and Idaho, as well as parts of Wyoming and Montana. It is not until 1848 that the first evidence of an American traveling through the valley exists, and still further, not until around 1850 that the first description of the valley and its people is written down by Samuel Hancock. During this period, more and more settlers are moving to Washington, impacting the lives of the Snoqualmie people and other peoples in the region. In 1850, there are 1,201 American settlers in Washington, though 0 in King County. In 1855, the United States government finally negotiated with the people whose territory it had claimed for several generations, and the Treaty of Point Elliott was signed. In return for the reservation and other benefits promised in the treaty by the United States government, the Snoqualmie Tribe and other local tribes exchanged their homeland. On September 14, 1851, the first American settlers in King County arrived near modern-day Seattle. The party included the Collins family. The young daughter of the Collins was Lucinda, who would one day become the first Euro-American woman to settle in the valley. In the 1850s, a series of expeditions was conducted to survey routes through Snoqualmie Pass. Army Captain George McClellan, Lieutenant Abel Tinkham, 1854, and Seattle businessmen Dexter Horton and Carson Boren, 1855, attempted to survey routes through Snoqualmie Pass for proposed wagon roads and transcontinental railroads. Several mistakenly took the higher Yakima Pass just south of Snoqualmie and were stymied by the difficult crossing. National disputes that led to the Civil War and local conflicts over treaties between tribes and the federal government slowed efforts to develop a trans-mountain route. Finding a route through the Cascades would have led to a transcontinental railroad from the east to the west coast. If discovered in time, it could have been the first in the nation, generating great wealth for Puget Sound and the region. In their 1855 survey, Dexter Horton joined others on an expedition to find the best Cascade Mountain Pass. The party traveled to Squak, Issaquah, then to Snoqualmie Falls, where they divided into two groups. One team used a traditional Indian trail, the other, the old Hudson's Bay Pack Trail, also an Indian trail. The teams met at Lake Catchy-Lus, parted again, and returned to Seattle to discuss their efforts. On January 22, 1855, near Mukilteo, the Treaty of Point Elliott was signed. The 1855 treaty created a government-to-government relationship between the United States and the Native American tribes involved in the treaty. The United States Senate ratified the Point Elliott Treaty in 1859. The Treaty of Point Elliott guaranteed hunting and fishing rights and reservations to all tribes represented by the native signers. In return for the reservation and other benefits promised by the United States government in the treaty, the tribes exchanged over 54,000 acres of their homeland. Today, those 54,000 acres encompass the cities of Seattle, Renton, Tukwila, Bellevue, and Mercer Island, as well as much of King County. The treaty was and is controversial. Not everyone agreed to or with its signing, and some signers did not necessarily feel that they had the authority to sign the treaty, while other signatures may have been forged. Additionally, with the delay in ratification and lack of reservations and benefits, yet the immediate implementation of American ownership, unrest built. Settlers cut away old-growth forests to build their log cabins and rough-hewn wood buildings. They cut down ancient trees to clear land for their farms and orchards. Native Americans had distinct advantages over the European settlers because they had adapted to the environment, and if that environment been adapted to their culture over millennia, they had developed trade networks, and were able to thrive. Within a generation, the railroad would shift this balance. European land use patterns led to widespread deforestation in certain parts of Europe by the Iron Age, and a lumber use technique that involved chopping down entire trees. As Europeans migrated to the east coast of North America and later to the west coast, they brought their cultural settlement and land use patterns with them. Many settlers came from the east coast, but many also came from Europe, where industrialization and urbanization, facilitated by railways from the 1830s on, had already caused a shift from a largely rural population to an urban one. This shift left millions destitute and seeking a better way of life, contributing to part of the migration pressure. Other settlers came from Asian countries. First Chinese laborers and later Japanese laborers settled in the region, also having faced similar pressures in their homelands. Both of these communities ultimately made significant contributions to railway construction in the region. Although some African Americans moved to Washington during this period, a large-scale migration did not occur in the 1800s. Join us for Snoqualmie Valley History 101, Colonization, for details on the period of colonization and settlement in the Snoqualmie Valley. For more information about Snoqualmie Valley history, visit the Snoqualmie Valley Museum in person Thursday through Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. or online at snoqualmievalleymuseum.org.